It's GameCube Index, and Pac is not whack. Pac-Man World 2 was the second entry in the Pac-Man 3D platforming series, which started in 1999 with Pac-Man World for the PlayStation. Instead of the classic Pac-Man look that players have been used to seeing since 1980, World brought Pac-Man to the modern world and gave a fresh look at the character. No longer trapped in a maze, but still hungry for pellets, in World 2, Pac-Man lives in Pac Village, which is a part of the greater Pac land. The story goes that back in medieval times, an evil ghost king named Spooky used to terrorize the land and its inhabitants, and the great wizard Pac created 5 golden fruit to seal Spooky away forever. Trapped by Sir Pac-a-Lot, Spooky was trapped under a tree at the very center of Pac Village. That is, until one night when our favorite ghosts, Blinky, Inky, Pinky, and Clyde, take the golden fruit and release Spooky. Now, it's up to Pac-Man to save Pac-Land once again and restore peace to the world. Obviously, the storyline is pretty basic, and it feels as though someone just took the core basics of Pac-Man, that is, fruits and ghosts, and threw it into a fairy tale. The narrative isn't necessarily a driving force for the game, as you can play without paying attention to the story, but for those of us that enjoy learning about the basics of a title, it's pretty disappointing. The 3D platforming of the game is pretty fun, as Pac-Man can butt bounce, speed dash, and flip kick his way through enemies and obstacles with relative ease. There's great variety throughout the game's 6 different worlds, from the joyous countryside of Pac-Land to the spooky, vertical platforming of Bedoing Woods, to traveling around in the Pac-Sub, a Pac-Man-friendly submarine. Enemies aren't too tough, and boss fights are a pretty interesting part of the game. Now, the bosses start out strong, with a really cool mechanical frog piloted by a member of the Ghost Gang, but the remaining 3 are essentially the same boss, just in a different world. The last 2 of the game are interesting, as they are a submarine experience and the final battle against Spooky, but the middle section of the game is severely lacking a diverse set of boss battles. The difficulty was actually improved in some way from the PS2 version. In the GCN version of the game, ghosts don't kill you with one hit, but rather do a standard amount of 1 block of damage. Now, this is one of 2 improvements made to the GCN title, with the other being a graphics enhancement. Looking back, I honestly just assumed that most PS2 titles received a graphical facelift, but at the start of the GameCube's life cycle, it was the other way around, and Nintendo was on the receiving end of most ports, and Pac-Man World 2 was no exception. The art style is fun, and a definite clear take on what Pac-Man should look like in 3D, which makes sense since it was based off of the official artwork from 1980. I actually owned Pac-Man World 2 way back when, after it became a player's choice title and was repackaged with Pac-Man Versus. The one thing that I remember standing out above all else was the camera controls, and how this was the first game that I ever played where I realized that the gameplay was actually hindered by one of the mechanics. For something so fundamental as the camera in a 3D platforming game, and for having been so many years since Super Mario 64 really perfected it, there's not much of an excuse for the camera in World 2. Too often, I'd be enjoying a level and get into a great groove, when the camera would change to a fixed position and my depth perception would be ruined. This would then turn into a torturous process where I'd spend a ton of lives trying to make a single jump, all because the levels were highly linear, and to hide that, Namco turned to a fixed camera to make everything appear larger. And while this did succeed in making me play the game for far longer than I could have, as the campaign is really only around 5 or 6 hours long, it was incredibly frustrating and left a bad taste in my mouth. Every single level includes collectibles strewn about that include pellets, fruit, and arcade tokens. And while the pellets and fruit really only serve as a score-based purpose, the arcade tokens have a bigger impact. Remember way back in episode 19 when we discussed Animal Crossing and that there were classic NES game emulations included in the game? Pac-Man World 2 borrowed a page out of that book and included Pac-Man, Pac-Attack, Pac-Mania, and Miss Pac-Man in the game, available upon collecting enough arcade tokens. These emulations are incredibly well done and help add to the ultimate Pac-Man experience. I really enjoyed finally unlocking Miss Pac-Man until my wife came in the room and promptly wrecked me at it. Pac-Man World 2 was a great platforming entry in the early days of the GameCube, in a time when thus far there hadn't been many platforming options. It was followed up with a sequel, Pac-Man World 3, and future Pac-Man games on the GameCube included Pac-Man Fever, Pac-Man Versus, and Pac-Man World Rally. We'll discuss all of these over the course of GCNdex, so stay tuned for more pellet-popping pleasure. That is it for this week's episode of GameCube Index. If you enjoy the videos every week, consider backing us on Patreon. Even $1 a month will do a lot to support the project and help improve the experience. It's entirely up to you. Either way, please continue to show your support by subscribing, sharing, following along on Twitter at GCNdex and at GCNdex.com. Thank you so much for watching. Tune in next time when we experience a Raveolution in Ravemaster.